and I'll take my camera off. Great, let me minimize that. All right, good morning or afternoon. Welcome to, oh wait, actually give me 1 second. I gotta wait for the recording to start. Okay. Welcome to Serving Safe Food. This is part 1 of Serving Safe Food. Serving Safe Food is a course that is required by everyone who is working with the food service in the food holding, food handling department. It is not for those who purchase or prepare or cook the food. You, of course, can take this class, but if you are preparing or cooking the food, you also need to take Serve Safe or an equivalent class. This class is about 2 hours long, so it will count for 2 hours of your required food safety training. And there will be an open book exam at the end, and you need to get a 75% or higher to pass. And if you do pass, you are certified for 5 years. You will get a certification from the Bureau of Aging and Disability Resources to keep on file. And if you don't pass, it's okay. You can take it again. Great. So why is food safety a top priority? Food safety is not something that we take lightly. We work with a vulnerable population. We serve older adults, and people's lives literally can be at stake if they become ill with a foodborne illness. So it's a responsibility of every person who is involved in food service, from the person who purchases the food all the way to the driver who delivers it. All of our roles are equally important. Foodborne illness is a major public health problem. And like I said, it can be fatal for seniors, children, or people with immunocompromised conditions. So we beg you not to take shortcuts or make compromises just because no one's looking. Please always do the right thing, even when no one's looking. We all must practice good food safety on a routine basis. Sad statistics of it are that as few as 1 to 10 bacteria can cause an illness. And in a little while, I'll tell you about how many bacteria that one little guy can grow into in as few as 2, 4, 6, 8 hours. Sadly, annually, 5,000 to 10,000 people die from foodborne illness. Up to 128,000 are hospitalized, and many more experience foodborne illness. You yourself have probably had a food poisoning incident where you've eaten something and you've gotten sick. That likely was from food being handled inappropriately, and you did get sick. And sadly, 70% of the foodborne illness deaths come from food service establishments. So it's imperative that we handle our food correctly. Every action in food service has the potential to impact the safety of food. From, like I said, purchasing, storage, preparation, holding, serving, and cleanup. Cleanup is also critically important, and we will go over proper washing and sanitizing of counters, equipment, and utensils. All right, now we are on page 2 of the booklet, where it talks about the difference between a foodborne illness and a foodborne outbreak. A foodborne illness, commonly called as food poisoning, is caused by eating a contaminated food or beverage. It can only be confirmed by a lab analysis, but I'm going to guess most of us have had food poisoning at one point in our life, and we don't want to have it again. This is important to note. A foodborne outbreak is an incident in which 2 or more people experience the same illness symptoms after eating a common food. So say you and your family went and you both had chicken at a local restaurant, and a day or 2 later you got sick from that chicken with the same kind of nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. that could be an indicator of a foodborne outbreak. You could and should report it to your local public health department for them to do further investigations. We don't ever want to have a foodborne outbreak in the elder nutrition program. So it's important for the test to remember the definition of foodborne outbreak. 2 or more people experience the same illness symptoms after eating a common food. All right, now we're on page 3 of the booklet. What must be done to keep food safe? Well, the first step in preventing a foodborne illness is to prevent the food or beverage from becoming contaminated or unsafe in the first place. So that's why we're so vigilant with these temperatures and the temperature monitoring. And that we assure that we purchase food from reputable organizations. There are 3 types of hazards and ways that food can become contaminated: biological, chemical, and physical. Biological are bacteria and pathogens which cause harmful microorganisms. Those are the things you hear about in the news, about an E. coli outbreak in the spinach, or staph bacteria, or salmonella in chicken. Those are all bacterial contaminants. Chemical contaminants would be things like glass cleaner, or broken glass, or your artificial fingernail, or your Band-Aid that fell into the food. No, I'm sorry, back that up. I went into physical contaminants, my apologies. Chemical contaminants are the actual chemicals that can contaminate the food. So that is like your glass cleaner, your stainless steel cleaner, all of those chemicals that you use, your sanitizer, your bleach. And then your physical contaminants are your broken glass, your hair, your fingernails, and your Band-Aids. So let's go into each one of those a little bit more now. So biological contaminants, they're bacteria or other microorganisms, and they are most likely to grow in the temperature danger zone. Now, you'll hear us talk a lot about the temperature danger zone, so we really want to get this solidified in your brain. For the elder nutrition program, the temperature danger zone that we talk about is 41 degrees to 140 degrees. The Wisconsin Food Code has it at 135. However, we set it 5 degrees higher because we do deal with a very vulnerable population. So temperature danger zone, 41 to 140. That will be important to keep in mind. Bacteria growth in 1 hour. Remember how I said I was going to show you how this all breaks down? Okay, so if I have one little bacteria, the little mad guy at the top, in the first hour, maybe I'll have 8 more bacteria. In the second hour, they'll double and 64 bacteria. By the 4th hour, that one bacteria can now be as many as 4,000 bacteria. By 6 hours, it can be approximately 33,000 bacteria. And by 8 hours, in the danger zone between 41 and 140, that one bacteria could reach up to a whopping 16 million bacteria. So you can understand now how we are always preaching about keep the food above 140 or below 41, because we want to keep it out of that danger zone where the temperature is right for the bacteria to grow quickly and rapidly and multiply. The more bacteria we ingest, the more likely we are to get sick. However, the more immunocompromised we are, depending on how many medications that we take that might suppress us, how many medical conditions we have that might suppress our immune system, or just our age in general, can make us more susceptible to foodborne illness. And the fewer number of bacteria can cause an illness in someone who is compromised. So now we're on page 3 of the booklet. Microorganisms may contaminate food due to the following causes. Poor personal hygiene during prep and serving. That is something we're always preaching about as well. Wash your hands, wear your gloves. If you need to cough or sneeze, do it appropriately, not into your gloves, into your shoulder, or your food. I mean, not your food, good Lord, into your clothes, and then wash your hands afterwards if you feel like it got on your hands, or change your gloves. If you have unsanitary facilities or equipment, that's why it's imperative also to clean and sanitize your counters, your utensils, and all of your equipment. And we'll talk about the process to do that shortly. If you have disease spreading pests, such as roaches, flies, mice, or rats, we want to make sure that we have a pest control plan in place so that we minimize those. Right, now we're on page 4. We're going to talk about chemical hazards and contamination.
Pam, did you want to?
Oh, yes. Yes.
PowerPoint?
Cassie, thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Cassie, what did you say?
Do you want to move the PowerPoint ahead? We're
It's
still
not?
No. Well, at least not for me. I don't know about everybody else.
What slide are you on, Cassie?
Biological contamination.
Huh. Let me try it again.
Okay. I'm not sure what everybody else is seeing, but.
Do you see chemical hazards?
I see chemical hazards.
Oh.
This is Melissa.
Maybe it's just me.
You might be frozen. Maybe
Okay,
you'll catch up in a second.
Along on my PowerPoint.
Okay, in the booklet, I'll make sure I say what page.
Okay.
So we're on page 4, chemical hazards and contamination. And chemical hazards can result from a harmful chemical getting into a food. For example, if you had a cup of bleach just sitting in a glass by the sink, a cup of bleach can look like water. What if someone spilled that or poured that onto the food or drank it? Chemicals always need to be labeled and in their appropriate container. Chemical contamination can be prevented by handling and storing the chemicals properly. They should be stored separately from food so that no accident happens and something spills and gets into a food. You should have your MSDS sheets, which are called, actually now they're called SDS sheets, which stand for safety data sheets, for each one of the chemicals you have in your kitchen, from everything from your dish soap to your sanitizing solution, to your glass cleaner. Even if you have whiteout, you should have a safety data sheet for those. And you should have those in a binder. It's nice to have them in like a yellow or orange or red binder, because those colors usually draw your attention and mean emergency information. And that binder should be in an area that is accessible to everyone, including your participants, in case, for example, the site manager would happen to get something in their eye or ingest something accidentally, that anyone at the site could look up the first aid information that's on the safety data sheet. And they also need to know to call 911 or the Poison Control Center right away if that happens. We do have some signs, if you need those, just let me know, that have those emergency numbers listed. But you should be able to get these SDS or MSDS sheets for free from anyone that you buy the chemicals from. You can also find them online, usually with a Google search. If you have any problems finding those, just let your GWAR nutrition team rep know and we can assist you. And like I said, if you do have like a sanitizing spray container that you mix up your own solution, make sure that it's labeled with what it is. There have been examples, in food service where people have sprayed, they thought they were spraying oil on the bread to make it shiny, and they grabbed a cleaner solution instead and sprayed it on. So that would be a perfect example of a chemical contamination because the bottle was not properly marked. Cassie, any questions in the chat so far?
Nope. We're good to go.
Thank you. Feel free to just jump in if there are, Cassie. Thank you. Okay, and then always measure your chemicals in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations and don't mix chemicals unless told to do so. For example, don't mix chlorine and ammonia. It can have a fatal effect. So make sure that you read the instructions and follow the instructions. We actually have just found some sites that we're not diluting their quat sanitizing solution. If you don't dilute it as you're supposed to and you don't use it properly, it's not going to have the correct effect. And more is not better with the chemicals. So when you're mixing the bleach solution, don't overmix it. It can have an adverse effect. Okay, allow only authorized personnel to have access to the cleaning chemicals. Always test your sanitizing solutions. So it's imperative that you guys have test strips at all of your sites so that people who are mixing the solutions can know if they're mixing them properly. And even if you follow the instructions, you should still use your test strip to make sure that it's the appropriate parts per million. If you need advice on where to buy test strips, again, let your GUAR nutrition team rep know. And when you have the pest control operators come into your facility to spray, make sure that you monitor them as they're spraying to be sure they don't contaminate food. All right, now we are on page 5. Metal contamination. Certain foods can react with metals during cooking and storage, causing the metal to actually leach into the food. As a dietitian personally will say, if you're iron deficient, you should use cast iron because you'll get some iron from the cast iron. But with my food service safety hat on, not everyone needs extra iron. So cast iron is not an approved equipment for cooking in our meal sites. We should use stainless steel. We should avoid enamelware, which can chip and expose the underlying metal. Don't use metal mixing bowls for holding hot foods and never store food in an open can. So don't open part of a can and serve up peaches and say, oh, I'll just put the rest of the can in the cooler until tomorrow. No, you should put the rest of the peaches in a proper storage container, label and date it, and then put it in the cooler. Always look for the NSF, which stands for the National Sanitation Foundation mark, or the UL, the Underwriter Laboratories mark, on your equipment when you're purchasing it to make sure that it is safe for food service. All right, we are on page 6 now. Did you know it's actually a law? The federal and the Wisconsin Food Code is a law. And part of the law says that food employees shall wear hair restraints. Now, I don't think you're going to get a ticket, but what you can do as we move to licensing, especially, is when the food inspectors come, you could receive a financial penalty and or be closed down if you have enough penalties that you're doing that are against what the food code lists. So make sure that you wear an effective hair restraint. And if you have a beard, you also need to wear a beard restraint. There are options. There's lots of options. This is one personally that I like because it just softens the look of the hairnet. You can see in the back that this is still a hairnet, but there's a brim in the front. This actual one you can purchase on Amazon. But there's many things like this. People can wear a hat. But if you wear a hat, you need to make sure that your hair is pulled back and effectively restrained. So I have a lot of hair. So I wear a hairnet and then I put a hat on over top of it. You can wear a skull cap like a surgeon's thing. You can wear a bandana. But again, the point is to make sure that your hair is effectively restrained behind and under whatever hair covering that you're using. They do have different size hair nets. You know, if you have a lot of hair, if you just got your hair done, you don't want to get it all smashed down. They have poofier ones, but it is really important that we wear effective hair restraints. And that means all the time. not just when you know someone's coming to check on you. We've had that happen a lot of times. Your participants will always bust you because we'll hear, oh, you're wearing a hairnet today, or oh, they have their gloves on today. And again, do the right thing even when no one's looking. All right, now we're going to move to physical hazards and contamination, which is page 6 of your booklet. So any foreign object that gets into the food, like I was talking about, a Band-Aid. I think sadly, too many of us have found a Band-Aid in our food, a hair in our food, who knows what, a bone in your food. All of those things would be physical contaminants. It's also important to avoid wearing nail polish because the polish can chip off and get into the food, and artificial nails can also break off and get into the foods. So we should keep our nails clean, trimmed, and unpolished in food service. Here's one example of a horrible outcome that came from artificial nails. In the late 90s, 8 infants actually died in a neonatal intensive care unit at an Oklahoma City hospital, and it was apparently due to infections from bacteria spread by false nails. So the longer the nails are worn, the more bacteria build up. Hand washing is not effective to get rid of that bacteria on that type of nail. So we would like you to not have artificial nails. And if you do, make sure you always have gloves on. Okay, let's see here. Now we are on page 7, which I got to get there. 1 second, please. Brief hold. Page 7. You will note on page 7 at the top of your booklet, it talks about food allergens and food allergies. We will circle back to that later in the PowerPoint. So don't think I'm forgetting about allergens. We're going to get back to that. It's just in a different part of the PowerPoint. So in a summary to section 1, the first line of defense against a foodborne illness is to prevent the contamination of food in the first place. 3 types of hazards: biological, like your E. coli, your salmonella; chemical, from your chemicals that you use; and physical, from anything that gets into the food. Harmful microorganisms or pathogens can come from a variety of sources, and they grow in the danger zone, which is again between 41 and 140. So any questions on section 1? All right.
Nope, and there's nothing in the chat.
Thank you. I know this is exciting stuff, but it's really important. So thank you guys. Okay, section 2. Now we're getting into the microorganisms. The microorganisms are everywhere. And again, we're not saying this to make you want to live in a bubble, but to be aware there. And as we all know with COVID, they are on doorknobs, they're on money, they're on pens, pencils, towels, your fingernails, in the soil, in your saliva. Microorganisms are everywhere. There's good bacteria, like yogurt that has billions of probiotics and active bacteria. Those are good. Those are good for our gut. Penicillin, that's good for us. But there's also many harmful bacteria and viruses that cause most foodborne illnesses. So if someone says, where do most foodborne illnesses come from? It's not from the physical or the chemical, it's from the bacteria and viruses. After food is eaten, there's a period of time before the symptoms appear, and that period of time varies depending on what the microorganism or bacteria is. Some of them can happen immediately, like you need to find a restroom before as you're driving home from the restaurant. Other ones, it can take a day, 2, 3, 7, some up to a month before the virus actually causes you to get ill. So it's just important to note that they're not all the same. And it also depends on, like I said, the state of your physical health and your immune system, how quickly you may get sick. To control growth, employees must control the conditions necessary for growth. Okay, and we are on page 8 if I didn't mention that. Okay, on page 8, I want to spend a little bit of time let me go back here. We'll just show this slide, but I want to go over fat tom and TCS foods, which are on the middle and bottom of page 8. So when you hear about fat tom, I always think about Thanksgiving, but fat tom just is the acronym for the conditions that make food more susceptible. Okay, so F stands for food. Microbes all require a food source. They prefer proteins and carbs, especially carbs that are cooked. So for example, we think of carbs, we think of bread. Well, bread isn't going to be a potentially hazardous food because it's dry. So that is actually stored at room temperature. However, when we take that bread and we make it into a stuffing, or we have like a cornbread or something like that that has some moisture to it, now we're getting into that conditions that can make it a potentially hazardous food. Also, carbs that are cooked, like potatoes and rice, beans, even cooked vegetables can become a potentially hazardous food. So that's the F, food. The acidity is the A. The microorganisms prefer a neutral environment, and most of the foods that we serve are neutral because we're serving older adults and they like more of a kind of a bland food. So they're perfect for bacteria growth. Temperature is the first T. Again, that temperature danger zone, they like between above 41 and below 140. They also need the time to grow. Most microbes double every 20 minutes. That's how they get to that crazy number I mentioned earlier. They need oxygen to grow, but some don't, but most do. And they need moisture and hydration to grow. And most of our food is also moist because we know older adults have problems with swallowing. And so we send gravies and sauces. So we have a lot of fat tom conditions in our food. Again, why we need to be vigilant with making sure the food is hot and cold. And also, I wanted to make you aware of the TCS foods, which stands for temperature, time and temperature controlled for safety. Microbes need nourishment to survive and multiply. Like I talked about, proteins and carbs they love. But it's not just raw meats where you think about, oh, E. coli or something came from the raw chicken. It can come from cooked meats too. And like I said, grains and starches have some protein, and cooked vegetables too. So all of those things can become a potentially hazardous food. And a couple of things that we need to also keep in mind are when we cut foods, like if you have a cut melon, or if you have a cut tomato, if you have cut or torn leafy lettuce, those also become potentially hazardous foods. Once we break the outer skin of the produce, we can introduce bacteria then, through the knife that we just used and or just through the environment that it's in. So that's why it's important when you get the food at the sites, if you get cut melon, cut tomatoes, or lettuce, that you put all of those in the cooler. Don't let them sit on the counter at room temperatures. They need to be in the cooler at 41 degrees or below. And you also need to temp those foods and record that temp on your temp logs. Any questions there? Okay. We'll actually circle back to this exact slide with more details when we get to page 13, but I'll just mention it here. Heating will kill bacteria in the food, but it won't kill the toxins they leave behind. So some bacteria make toxins in food as they grow and die. So if we have a food that's held in the danger zone and they're growing and growing and then they die, they might leave these little toxins behind. And if we just reheat the food, thinking, oh, it was in the danger zone for X hours, we'll reheat it and it will be fine. Not necessarily. If they left a bunch of toxins behind, the heat will not kill the toxins. And the toxins can make you sick or sicker than the bacteria. Freezing and cooling will not kill bacteria. It only stops or slows their growth. So that's why we encourage older adults, really anyone, if you're not going to eat your food right away, or within 1 or 2 days, 3 at the most, the food is still safe to eat, but you should freeze it. Otherwise, bacteria can grow. So once you put the food into the freezer, and the sooner you get in the freezer, the better, because like I said, freezing and cooling won't kill the bacteria, it slows their growth. So get the food in the freezer if you're not going to eat it right away. All right. I'll circle back to that slide a little bit more when we get to farther in the PowerPoint, or in the booklet, actually. Okay, now we're on page 9. So how do harmful organisms contaminate our foods? Well, during receiving or storage. So if we received a food off the food truck and it started to partially thaw, for example, that could be that's a big red flag. We should reject that food. And how you'll know if it started to partially thaw, there'll be ice crystals in there, or it will be soft. So we don't know how long it's been, defrosting. So again, bacteria are growing there. So, and if we don't store the food correctly, if we don't have thermometers in our coolers and freezers that verify that the temp of the cooler and freezer is where it's supposed to be, then we could be growing bacteria. We had a case of a gentleman reported our milk was always spoiled. So a local program did all this brainstorming and problem solving to figure out what the heck, because nobody else was reporting their milk was spoiled. So finally they went to the gentleman's house and they found out that his refrigerator was actually set at 50 degrees. It was not working properly. So all of his food was just continually growing bacteria, and the milk was becoming spoiled, as was his other food. So that's an example of that. During preparation and serving, if we don't cook the food, correctly, if there's blood in the meat, it's not cooked to the proper temperature. If we store the foods incorrectly in the cooler, where we have like raw meat juice dripping down on a ready to eat like pudding, that's going to be a problem. During serving, if we're not holding the food above 140 or below 41, or if we change out a dish, say we had a pan of spaghetti, and then we used up that pan of spaghetti, and we have a new pan of spaghetti we have to start dishing, you should actually use a new utensil when you start serving that. And I'll talk more about cross-contamination in a minute. If we don't properly cool things, and I'll talk about that details in a couple of minutes. Cross-contamination, which I started to allude to, we'll cover more shortly. Employees to food by unwashed hands, coughing or sneezing. This is a huge one. So please, vigilance when you wash your hands. 20 seconds, warm water, soap, rub it, agitate those hands, and then rinse them well. It is imperative. And unsanitary facilities and equipment, like I talked about, and disease spreading pest, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. Okay, now we're still on page 9, I think. So your responsibility to prevent contamination and to prevent the growth of microorganisms. Okay, now we're on page 10, where there's specific types of microorganisms. Actually, we're going to get back to those. So just note that we're going to get back to those a little bit later on the slides. So I'm just going to move over to this, which is on page, I don't even know if this is in here, this next slide. I think it is. I think it's on page 11, possibly. But food employees may not contact exposed ready-to-eat foods with their bare hands. You have to use tongs, deli tissue, or single-use gloves. So for example, if you were making a sandwich, you shouldn't use your bare hands to make the sandwich, because the bread is a ready-to-eat food. You should use gloves, clean gloves. If you were going to grab a donut or something for someone, you should use deli paper or tongs. Make sure that your utensils that you're dishing up the food with have long enough handles. We have had it before where there's short handles that when you put the one spoon down to go over to the next food to dish it up, the handle sneaks right into the food. And then, you know, you have to fish it out of there. And now that handle that just snuck into the food could potentially have contamination on it if your gloves are dirty, and now that is in the food. So make sure that your handles of your serving utensils are long enough that that doesn't happen. Or some have a little lip that can, you know, prevent it from sneaking right into the food. Okay. See. Page 11 now, I guess, we're still on. The main causes of foodborne illness are poor personal hygiene, primarily hand washing, abuse of time and temperature, and cross-contamination. So it's completely appropriate for you to have dress codes at your facility. Some places actually have all the hats and the hair coverings kept and stored at the site. So people don't actually take the hat home. They keep it there. Or the drivers, when they go out on their route, they come back, they keep their hat there when they come back, you know, with their name on it and such. You don't have to do that, of course, but otherwise, please stress that don't take your same hat that you're wearing in the food service kitchen or to deliver meals and wear it in the barn or to clean your house or to do any other thing. That should be just for the food service. If you have aprons, they can be disposable or they can be ones that you can wash. But if they are ones that need washed, you need to wash them and change them daily. And please don't wipe your hands on them and use them as a towel and a rag because that is a way that we can get contamination also. If you're sick, please stay home because the bacteria and the virus that you have in your body can be spread through food. So please, I know all of you are critically important and you are such servants and have servant hearts and you want to be there to make sure the food gets out. But if you are sick, you can do more harm than good. So please stay home when you're sick. If by chance, and I hope this never happens, you develop a foodborne illness that is confirmed by a doctor, then you should not return to work until you have a clearance from that doctor that that foodborne illness is out of your body. Okay. Everyone has bacteria on our skin, in our hair, in our eyes, in our nose, in our mouth. So we always say, don't touch the T-zone on your face. So if you think about your eyes as the top of the T, and then your nose and your mouth as the bottom of the T, that's what we talk about, the T-zone. So don't touch the T-zone with your gloved or your bare hands. That's where a lot of bacteria live in your body and can enter into your body, by the way, as well. If you don't wash your hands after you use the restroom, we can cause contamination with all sorts of stuff that lives in our lovely GI tract. If you cough or sneeze on food or equipment, you can make others sick. And if you have an open cut or burn, even if it's not infected right now, anytime you have a sore, an open cut, a burn, make sure it is covered completely with a bandage. And if you're able to put a glove over that bandage, even better. Any questions so far?
Nothing
Okay.
in the chat.
Thank you, Cassie. So it's actually page 11 and 12. So this is just a little fun germ facts. Each square centimeter of your skin has about 1,500 microbes. A microbe per square inch, like on the phone, 25,000. Desktop, 21,000. Your keyboard, 3,200. Your computer mouse, these are estimates, of course. The toilet seat, only 49. So I guess we should really just be eating up the toilet seat. I just think that's such an interesting fact. So the point of this slide is to show you that the things that you commonly touch have a lot of microbes on them. So make sure that you're washing your hands after you answer the phone, after you're picking up, doing something on your keyboard or typing with your mouse, you know, on the keyboard or touching your mouse before you handle the food. Okay, now we're going to pop back to where I told you we were going to get back to it, page 10. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these because there's a lot of them. let me just see where I'm at on time. Yeah. So, but Campylobacter causes the most cases of infectious diarrhea in the US, and infection lasts 1 to 7 days. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. C. diff, if you've heard of this, it can grow rapidly in the danger zone. And the incubation period is only 6 to 24 hours. This one can make people really sick. They all can. Listeria, this is one we're hearing more about, and this is really common in older adults because it is in deli meats, hot dogs, unpasteurized dairy, and raw meat. So a lot of our older adults will eat a lot of sandwiches and hot dogs because they're easy to prepare. Well, that little juice in the package, as I like to think of it, that can be where this little listeria is living. And so if that juice kind of spills into your, you know, like your meat drawer or something, make sure that you wipe that up with hot soapy water right away. This one's uncommon in healthy people, but like I said, it can be more common in seniors, and it's rare, but it can be deadly. And if you actually become infected with listeria, it can kill up to 1/4 of those people who become infected with it, with extreme cases. And if you it can also cause pneumonia, meningitis, and sepsis, also things that are very likely to make you very sick or can be fatal. E. coli, we hear a lot about. This is a horrible stat, kills 1 in 50 of its victims, comes from raw and undercooked ground beef and contaminated produce. And this is the one that we hear a lot about with our spinach recalls, or, you know, whatever recalls. It would be a lot of times because of E. coli, or like I say right here, transmitted via feces to mouth if you don't wash your hands. Wash your hands. Salmonella is a very common one you hear about. It can begin within 12 to 72 hours, real common in poultry, eggs, and dairy. This is a crazy fact right here. Can survive for weeks outside a living body, has even been found in dried animal excrement after 2.5 years. Crazy. They're resilient. Shigella, again, I'm not going to talk a lot about these. So you guys have the this as a reference. Botulism, that's why we do not allow any home canned produce or product. If you see any of that at your sites, please stress and explain that botulism can happen in home canning if things aren't properly canned. We cannot allow any of that. You know, people, again, with the best heart and want to bring in their homemade sauerkraut. No, 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 no. We can't allow that. Hepatitis A. Okay, I'm not going to talk about that. So now we're jumping over to, where are we at? Let me get caught up here on my slides. Page 13 of our booklet, we're going to pop over to, and we're going to talk about time and temperature. So you all know that it's a requirement of the program to take and record the temperatures of the foods daily, and not just once daily. They need to be taken when they leave the caterer, and the caterer needs to record that temperature. Then when we get the food, we need to take and record the temperature. If the food is being held longer than 30 minutes, we need to take and record that temperature again. So say it came in at 9 o'clock, and then we're dishing up the home delivered meal starting at 9:30, we'll take the temperature, record it of all the hot and all the cold foods, and record it on the form. If you don't have a form, contact your GWAR nutrition team rep, and we will get you a form, and we'll get you education on this. But it's imperative, if you don't write it down, you didn't do it. And then if you, after you package your meals, if there's a longer time than 30 minutes before you're serving your senior dining folks, you'd have to check the temperature again. And then we need to check the temperature of the home delivered meal routes at least once a month for routes that are longer than an hour, or once a quarter for routes that are shorter than an hour. That is the current requirement. That may be changing. We want to check the temperatures at the end of the route with a test tray to assure that that food stayed above 140 or below 41 during the whole time it was delivered. That is quite a chore. It's really hard to keep the food above 140 or below 41. But since our program has decided to be this elite program and serve hot and cold food, because we know seniors have a harder time reheating foods, we have to make sure that we have the proper equipment to keep it hot and cold. That means including cold sources in our coolers and heat sources in our hot bags. Again, we just updated the list of equipment. We have several options. There's even options where you can get inserts that go into your vehicles, no matter how small or large they are, that are actually little ovens that are holding units that can keep the food held at proper temperatures. So please contact us if you have any problems with that. Okay. Let's see here. This in red might be on the test. Temps must be taken upon arrival and then every 30 minutes thereafter. Food should remain in the danger zone no longer than 4 hours. This is important. There might be it's not 6 hours, it's not 8 hours. Food should remain in the danger zone no longer than 4 hours. We don't want it in the danger zone at all. But if it does go in the danger zone, it should be no longer than 4 hours. So this comes into play when we have a cooking site that's cooling down food. So for example, if I'm making a tuna pasta salad, say, and I have my hot pasta, that pasta is going to be above 140, right? Or 140 when I get done making it. So for my tuna pasta salad, I need to cool the food from 140 to 70 degrees within 2 hours. And then from 70 degrees to 41 degrees or lower within an additional 4 hours. So if the food has not reached 70 within those first 2 hours, I would actually have to reheat it to 165 and keep it there for 15 seconds and start the process all over again. Tuna pasta salad is a kind of a tricky example with that. But the reason I stress that is because if you're having like a cold pasta salad, the vendor or the caterer should be making it the day before. It's almost impossible to get it down unless you're coming in at 1 or 2 in the morning to get it below 41 and get all the ingredients below 41. They could do it, by making sure the tuna is already cold and all the ingredients are already cold, but still it's tricky. So these salads that are coming in like this need to be below 41. So make sure that you check them. If they're not, you should reject them because we don't know when it was made, how long it was in that temperature, or for sure be communicating with your caterer about that. But if it comes in above 41, you should reject it. And that's why it's important to have some emergency or shelf-stable food on hand at your sites, just in case you have this kind of situation and maybe you couldn't serve the tuna salad that day. And you'll be like, well, that's okay. I got a bunch of tuna salad packets back here. We're going to serve those up. So again, a conversation we can have. If you would like, just email your nutrition team rep and we'll be glad to talk to you more about that. Cooling foods, cool foods under refrigeration. This is on slide, where are we at? 14, we're on page 14 in the booklet. It's not acceptable to cool the foods on the countertop, or defrost the foods on the countertop. Sadly, I've walked into programs where that morning when I walked in, there was a hamburger on the counter that had been sitting there all night defrosting. So guess what? They didn't have hamburger that day. Do not let foods cool and defrost on the countertop. There's appropriate ways to cool and defrost foods. When we're cooling food, so if I had that tuna pasta salad again, I want to put it in shallow pans and metal, the stainless pans, because plastic actually is an insulator. So you don't want to take, so for example, say you had a bunch of chili, you made a huge batch of chili or gravy. You don't want to put that gravy or chili in a big plastic container like a 5-gallon bucket or something, because number one, those huge volumes is going to be hard to cool down quickly. And then the plastic acts as an insulator, actually keeping the heat in. So cut roast into smaller pieces, use an ice bath or an ice wand or a blast chiller. And to kind of stir through the food, but you got to get that food down and cooled and kept cool. Let's see where we're at now. We're on page, well, we're going to be on page 15 in a second, but when transporting food from the kitchen to a remote site, be sure to store the food immediately when it arrives in order to maintain the safe internal temperatures. We just found this at a site last week. One of our teammates went out and the food was fine. It was the right temperature when it left the caterer. When it got to the site, they were not putting it in a hot holding or in cold holding. So it was setting at room temperature on the counter. And then when they packaged the meals, they were not using hot or cold sources when they went out. The routes were very long, 6 hours in length. So that food was in the danger zone potentially for 6 or more hours. So what happened is that site had to immediately stop serving food until they got their processes together and the proper equipment in place. No one wants to older adults to go without food. The last thing that we want is older adults to go out without food, but we cannot in good conscience serve food that could potentially be causing them to become fatally ill. So it's imperative, keep the food hot, keep the food cold when you get it. And if you need any extra equipment, please talk to your nutrition director. Food thermometers, page 15. This is actually how we know if the food is above 140 or below 41. Accurate food thermometers are the only tools that can judge the internal temperature of a food. The length of time a food has been cooked or the appearance is not a good indicator. We had someone one time said, well, the food is steaming. Well, our state dietitian at the time said, well, I'm looking out the window at the lake here in Wisconsin, and it's the middle of the winter and the lake is steaming. That doesn't mean the food is hot and safe. So you have to check the internal temperature, and the thermometers that only check the surface of the food are not allowable. They have to be probe thermometers, either a digital or a stem, because we have to know the internal temperature of the food. And we have to make sure that our thermometers are properly calibrated. First, we have to have thermometers at the sites. So make sure you have a thermometer. If you don't have a thermometer, talk to your nutrition director immediately, get a thermometer. Number two, once you get a thermometer, you have to know how to calibrate it. And calibrating it will require ice. So you need to have ice at the sites. I will tell you a little bit about how to do it, and then I'm going to show you a short video on, it's just a 2.5 minute video that shows you how to calibrate your thermometer. If we were doing this in person, I would have each of you show me how you are calibrating your thermometer. So I would ask that after this class, you make sure you go back and you practice calibrating your thermometer. So what you do is you fill your glass with crushed ice, then you add water until the glass is full. You want to have a lot of ice, more ice than water. You place the thermometer in the center of the ice slurry. Don't touch the sides or the bottom. Gently stir it around with the thermometer. The thermometer should read 32 degrees. You should wait for the thermometer dial to completely stop before you say, oh, that's the temperature it is. Don't, wait for the dial to stop. I think that might be on the test. Then if it's not 32 degrees, you adjust it by using the calibration nut if you're using a stem thermometer, and the video will show you how to do that. The boiling point we don't use, so I'm not going to talk about it. It is in your book on page 16 and 17. That's a great reference for you to keep at your sites. So let me see if I can get this video to play. Let's see. Let me pause that a second. Did you hear that? Could you hear that video when it was playing?
No.
You couldn't? Okay, then I'm not gonna take the time to play it. I don't know why.
I don't know if anybody else did though. I might be having
Yeah,
trouble.
probably not. So I will let you guys do that on your own, and then I will try to figure it out and do a separate recording of that. So let me get rid of this and let's go back to this. But just know this is a great video link. It's only a couple minutes and it's a great thing to show to all your site managers and home delivered meal drivers if they're actually checking the temps too. It actually shows them how to calibrate the nut on the back of their thermometer if they have a stem thermometer. We do have a couple other videos for the digital thermometers. Usually to calibrate those, you just either push a button or change the batteries. A lot of times they'll say they're always calibrated, but still you always need to check them to make sure that when you put it in ice water, it's 32 degrees. If it's not, then like I said, you either need to hit the reset button, change the batteries, whatever the directions say. Okay, now how to use the thermometer is on page 16. You clean and sanitize the stem after every use. That means that you need an alcohol swab or a proper sanitizing solution. Alcohol swab is much preferred method because we know that those are appropriate. And it's an alcohol swab that's designed for food service. It's not a a Clorox sheet or, any other sheet. It needs to be an alcohol swab. And then you air dry that for a few seconds. And then you measure the internal temperature of the food by inserting the stem of the thermometer into the center or the thickest part of the food. Don't touch the bone or the fat. And if you have a skinny food like hamburgers, you might want to stack a few of those up to check the temperature or take the temperature from the side. Let's see. You insert it far enough for the cover to cover the sensor. When you guys look at your thermometer, there'll be a little dimple at the bottom, maybe an inch or two up from the very bottom of the thermometer. That needs to be covered. That's your sensor area between there and the bottom. So make sure that is covered. And then, like I said, wait until the dial stops moving to read the temperature. It can take up to 15 seconds. Oh, minutes. Good Lord, we need to type that. Fix that typo. 15 seconds. For it to stop moving. You want to clean and sanitize it before you put it back away. So clean and sanitize in between each food. So I'm checking the roast beef. I'm cleaning and sanitizing, air drying. Now I'm checking the mashed potatoes, cleaning and sanitizing, air drying. And then I'm going to check the green beans. And then finally, before I put it away, I'm going to clean and sanitize it. And by the way, you can use the same alcohol swab during each of these. Just try to use a different section of the swab, open it up kind of big. There should be plenty of room there. You store it in a clean area and in the case. And then, you clean it and then you sanitize it and then you put it away. I've had before where I pulled out thermometers out of drawers and there's hunks of meat and all sorts of junk on them. So make sure they're clean and sanitized. Otherwise, again, contamination can be occurring. I might have cleaned and sanitized it and I put it in a dirty case. So make sure both are clean and sanitized. And like I said, if you have a digital thermometer, we still want you to check all thermometers at least weekly or anytime they're dropped or bumped. And to record those that you did check the calibration on your temperature log, or you can have a separate thermometer calibration log, which we now have available thanks to Cassie Hurd. Okay, now we are on page 19, and I'm going to pause here since it's 11:05, and we'll take a 5-minute break. So we'll be back at 11:10. I'm going to stop the recording.